Admiral, I know that you've already answered a number of questions on the unsuccessful test, which came as a surprise to us. I know a review board has been established, which will help us better understand it. From what I read, it doesn't seem to be an indictment of the ground-based interceptor system as a whole, but rather a more narrow issue. Would you generally agree with that based on what you know so far?
Yes, ma'am. Every part of the system worked as designed up to the failure of the EKV to separate.
Thank you. Admiral, a 2012 report by the National Research Council concluded that there are gaps in our nation's ballistic missile defense system, particularly when it comes to protecting the East Coast. Alaska's going to be fine, but Maine there's a real gap. The report highlighted a location in Maine as one of two possible sites for an additional missile interceptor field. In your written testimony, you stated that MDA has begun to evaluate several candidate sites in anticipation of conducting an EIS for an additional ground-based interceptor site within the United States, and we've discussed this in my office as well. Could you provide the subcommittee this morning with an update on where you are in this review process, and are you still looking at the two sites identified in the National Research Council report as well as other sites?
Ma'am, thank you for the question. I'll answer the second part first. Yes, we are looking at the two sites in Maine in conjunction with other sites as well. We are in the process of screening, is a good word for it, screening all of the sites that we have looked at in detail down to a number that will then result in us going to ask first any government entities in the area for additional information, and then eventually for us to go on site to several of these places before the end of the year to do site surveys. My plan is within the next 2 to 3 weeks, once we've gotten the approval through the building of the sites that have been screened for the criteria of wanting further information, needing further information in terms of viable contenders. There's many factors that go into that, as you know, Senator, with safety, location, system effectiveness, the geographic location, base infrastructure, land infrastructure. There's a whole series of criteria that I've used, but what we'll do is we will notify the Congress before we go public with any of those selections. And once we do that and brief the staff members, we'll go ask the sites for more information. We'll then take that information and study it for another few weeks and then send people to the sites that have the most promise. It's a very serious effort that is backed up with thousands of pages of documentation and analysis. It is not haphazard.
I know that you will do a thorough review, and in addition to the criteria that you mentioned, I also would encourage you to look at local support and acceptance for the site. I know in my state of Maine, it is a very welcoming place for military installations of this sort. In fact, I've sent several letters from local groups that endorse the site being located in northern Maine at the site of the former Loring Air Force Base. But I think that's a very important part of this review process, locating the site in an area where it is not welcomed by the population, I don't think would be wise. So in addition to all those extremely important technical issues, I hope that you will consider that factor as well.
Ma'am, we do consider that factor, and that will be a factor in the decision.
Thank you. Separate from the discussion regarding an additional interceptor site, would an additional radar site on the East Coast increase our early warning capabilities regarding threats emanating from the Middle East?
Yes, ma'am. An additional radar would help us with the discrimination problem and threat that we see in the future.
And that's what you seem to be saying in response to Senator Murkowski's question as well. Now, I understand that your plan is for the environmental impact study for the potential third interceptor site to be accomplished in fiscal year 2014. Do you have funding included in the budget request to conduct that study? I know EISs are expensive, as well as the fact that they take a long time.
No, ma'am. There's not money in the budget request currently. We'll be working with the Congress on methods to address that shortfall.
Admiral, both President Bush and President Obama have recognized the advantages of an additional missile defense site for more effective defense against long-range ballistic missile threats. You have looked very carefully at this issue. Could you give us your evaluation since 2002 and 2009, when the two different presidents made policy decisions in this area? Has the ballistic missile threat from our potential adversaries grown, stayed the same, decreased? What's your assessment of the threat?
Ma'am, I'll answer it in the context of being a consumer of intelligence, and I'll let the intelligence experts talk about that in more detail in a classified setting. But I will say that as the strategy that was announced by the Secretary is a key point of, the threat has advanced, and North Korea has made strides. The Taepodong-2 launch in December meant something, and we must be able to address that. And the 44 GBIs in Fort Greely will enable us to stay ahead of that threat as we see it develop, and we'll be constantly evaluating where we need to be in terms of censoring and discrimination, and potentially more GBIs beyond the 44.
Thank you. Let me just end, Admiral, by thanking you for your leadership of this very important agency. You took over a troubled agency that had some personnel and morale issues, and from everything I've seen, you've really turned the agency around, and I commend you for your leadership.
Thank you, ma'am. As I sign off every update to the agency, it's an honor to serve with each one of them. And I've been in the Navy 28 years, and it's by far the most professional and dedicated workforce I've ever had the chance to work with.
It's great to hear, because the mission is a really important one. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Collins.